This story titled, I found out my husband has a private bank account he never told me about. He says it's just in case, but now I feel like he's planning to leave me. Am I overreacting? It was an ordinary evening, the kind that had filled our home for the past 25 years. The warm scent of stew simmering in the kitchen and the quiet hum of the dishwasher were the familiar sounds of our lives together. My husband, Jake, was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels aimlessly. I sat next to him, lost in my own thoughts, absent-mindedly stirring my tea. We were comfortable. Too comfortable, maybe. At 52, I thought we had built a life that was steady and predictable. You see, when you've been married for over 2 decades, you start to think you know everything about each other. You've shared experiences, dreams, regrets, and laughter. So when something unexpected happens, when something feels out of place, it shakes you to your core. It was about a week ago when I discovered the bank account. I hadn't meant to snoop, but I had been trying to track our finances and needed access to Jake's password manager. He had always handled the money, the bills, the big decisions. For years, I had trusted him completely to manage our shared financial life. But that day, something felt off. I noticed the password manager was open, and a small pop-up notification appeared about a new transaction in an account I had never seen before. Curiosity tugged at me. I opened it, only to find a separate savings account under Jake's name, one that didn't have my name on it at all. My heart skipped a beat. At first, I thought I was mistaken, but the account was real. It was hefty, with tens of thousands of dollars in it, and the most surprising part was that it had been open for years. Jake and I had always been open about our finances. We both worked hard. He was a mechanic. I worked part-time as a nurse. We managed to save a little, live modestly, and build a solid future together. But this account, this hidden stash, was a mystery. I confronted Jake that evening. I remember how his face dropped when I showed him what I had found. "It's nothing," he said quickly, waving his hand dismissively. "Just in case." In case of what exactly? That's what I wanted to know. But Jake wouldn't elaborate. "It's just for emergencies, something extra. I didn't think it was important to tell you." I couldn't swallow that explanation. The words hung in the air, thick and heavy, like an unwelcome guest. "What kind of emergency? Why didn't you tell me about it? Why keep it a secret?" Jake's expression changed. He grew defensive. "I didn't think it was necessary," he repeated, his voice rising slightly. "It's my money, and I don't see why it's a big deal. But it was a big deal to me." Why was he so adamant about hiding something so important? Had I been living in the dark about our marriage for years? My thoughts began to spiral. Was this his way of preparing for something? What if he was planning to leave me? What if this, just in case, was his safety net, a way to protect himself if things went south? I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in my gut, the one that told me something wasn't right. Was I overreacting? I wondered, pacing around the living room, as the quiet tension between us grew. It had been a week, and the silence was unbearable. Jake's indifference to the situation only fueled my anxiety. Every time I asked him about it, he would brush me off. "Drop it, Marissa," he'd say, his tone clipped, his eyes avoiding mine. I could feel the distance growing between us, like a wall slowly being built right in front of me. The more I tried to understand his reasoning, the more he pulled away. It was as if this little secret had created a rift, a crack in the foundation of our marriage. The trust that we had built together felt like it was crumbling, piece by piece. I couldn't help but wonder, had he always been this way? I had never known Jake to be someone who would hide something so important. We had always been open with each other, from the smallest details to the biggest decisions. The thought of him keeping something this significant to himself felt like a betrayal. I had to talk to him again. This time, I needed answers, the kind of answers that could either reassure me or break my heart. That evening, I tried a different approach. I sat down beside him, not angry, but vulnerable. I took his hand in mine, my voice trembling as I asked, "Jake, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me with this?" His face softened for a moment, and he sighed deeply. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Marissa, I never wanted you to worry," he said quietly, his voice filled with guilt. "I didn't think you'd understand. I didn't want to burden you with something that wasn't important. But it was important. I was his wife. We had shared everything for so long, so why should this be any different?" "I feel like you're planning something," I whispered, the words escaping me before I could stop them. "What if you're getting ready to leave me? What if you've already made up your mind, and this is just your way of preparing?" Jake went silent, his grip tightening around my hand. The seconds stretched into eternity. I felt as if time had stopped, the weight of the moment pressing down on both of us. Finally, he spoke, but his words didn't offer me the reassurance I was hoping for. "I'm not planning to leave you, Marissa," he said, his voice almost pleading. "This isn't about that. I just needed to have something for myself." For myself. That phrase echoed in my mind. Was he feeling suffocated by our marriage? Did he need an escape? Or was this a momentary lapse in judgment? His words felt empty, like he was trying to convince me of something that wasn't true. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story, something he wasn't telling me. And as I looked at him, I began to wonder, what was the real reason behind this secret account? Could he be hiding something deeper, something darker than I was willing to admit? The unease grew. Every small gesture, every look now felt like a signal. Was he lying to me? Was I being too paranoid? Or was I simply trying to ignore the obvious truth, that maybe, just maybe, he was preparing for a life without me? Days passed, and the air in our home grew colder, more distant. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jake was keeping something from me, something more than just a private bank account. He had always been the strong, dependable one, the person I leaned on for comfort and reassurance. But now I found myself second-guessing everything about him, about us. I kept replaying our conversation over and over in my mind. His words about having something for himself haunted me. What did that mean? Was he dissatisfied with our life together? Did he feel trapped in our marriage? The questions swirled in my head, and each one seemed more painful than the last. Jake went about his days as usual, but something was different. He wasn't as present, as attentive. He spent more time at work, and when he was home, he seemed distracted, lost in his thoughts. The small, comforting gestures he used to give me, holding my hand, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek, had all but disappeared. I tried to ignore the feeling that something was slipping away from me, but it was impossible. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't just sit here, letting my mind race with worries. I needed to find out the truth. So I began to dig. I went through Jake's things, his emails, his phone, even his work receipts. I knew it wasn't the most trustworthy thing to do, but I couldn't help myself. If he wasn't going to open up to me, then I would have to open up the doors he had closed. It was one evening, after Jake had gone to bed, that I found something. A small slip of paper tucked in the back of his wallet. It was a number, an address, and a name I didn't recognize. My heart stopped as I stared at the piece of paper, the weight of what I might be about to uncover pressing down on me. I thought about confronting him, about demanding answers right then and there, but something stopped me. I needed to know more. If I confronted him now, I would only get half the truth, if that. So I made a decision to follow the lead, to see where it would take me. The next morning, while Jake was at work, I drove to the address on the slip of paper. It was a small, nondescript building on the edge of town. My heart raced as I parked my car across the street and sat for a moment, watching. I had no idea what I was hoping to find, but I knew I had to do this. I couldn't live in this uncertainty any longer. I waited for what felt like hours before Jake finally appeared, walking into the building without a second glance. I felt my stomach churn, but I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew that whatever it was, it couldn't be good. I stayed parked, watching, for the next few hours. I tried to tell myself I was just being paranoid, but the feeling in my gut told me something different. I kept asking myself, why was he here? What was he doing? Why hadn't he told me about this place, about the address on the slip of paper? Finally, Jake emerged from the building. He looked normal, unaffected. He didn't see me in my car across the street. He got into his truck and drove away without a hint of guilt on his face. It was as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had changed. I followed him for a while, but he didn't head home. Instead, he drove to a small house on the outskirts of town. A house I had never seen before. My heart pounded in my chest as I parked at a distance, trying to remain unseen. I didn't know what to think. Was he meeting someone? Was this the place he had been hiding all along? Was there another life I didn't know about? I watched, holding my breath, as Jake got out of the truck and walked up to the door. The door opened almost immediately, and a woman appeared. She was younger than me, with long, dark hair and a smile that seemed to reach her eyes in a way I hadn't seen in years. They exchanged a few words, and then Jake stepped inside. The door closed behind him, leaving me sitting there, frozen, unable to move. It was like a punch to the gut. I felt as if the ground had been ripped out from beneath me. All the doubts, all the fears that had been swirling in my mind, suddenly crystallized into a harsh, undeniable reality. Jake had been hiding something from me. Someone. And I had no idea how long it had been going on. I stayed in my car for what felt like an eternity, tears streaming down my face as I tried to make sense of it all. How had I not seen this? How had I been so blind? The life I thought I knew, the man I had trusted, had been living a secret life behind my back. And now I was left with nothing but questions, nothing but heartache. But I knew one thing for certain. I had to confront him. I couldn't keep living in the shadows pretending that everything was fine when it was falling apart. I had to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. When I finally made my way home, I didn't find Jake. He was still at the house, and for a moment I debated whether or not to wait for him to come back or if I should just go and confront him now. But something inside me told me to wait, to let him come to me, to face the truth on his own. When Jake finally came home hours later, he looked tired, but he didn't seem guilty. It was as if nothing had happened, but I knew. I knew everything. He stood in the doorway, looking at me, waiting for me to say something. And when I spoke, my voice was steady, despite the tears that still lingered in my eyes. "Who was that woman, Jake?" I asked softly, my heart in my throat. "What's going on?" He didn't answer right away. He seemed to hesitate, almost as if he was trying to decide whether or not to lie. But in the end, he didn't. "I'm sorry, Marissa," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted you to find out this way, but I didn't know how to tell you." And just like that, the truth finally came crashing down around me. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.